in LA. Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Dr. Colin A. Ross, R-O-S-S, M.D. If you're watching this on my 3 YouTube channels, X, Rumble, Rockfin, you'll see the title of a book that he published originally in 2000. He republished it, I think, in 2006 or 7. And the 2006 or 7 title, the full title is The CIA Doctors' Human Rights Violations by American Psychiatrists. But he originally published it, if you can kind of read the small lettering of the book title, it originally was published in 2000. Bluebird, Deliberate Creation of Multiple Personality by Psychiatrists, I think is what it is. But he came to my attention. Somebody on my Patreon suggested him as a guest. And I've been posting all these shows I've done about the Manchurian Candidate. And he's like an optimal fit. Like, wow. This book was way ahead of the curve, in my opinion. Originally published in 2000. And contains a lot of the material that I've kind of covered in much more detail, great research, some names that I'm familiar with, some that I'm not. Some of the material that he covers is kind of topical because I've been looking into the Epstein files, and Elizabeth Loftus popped up as a defense expert for Ghislaine Maxwell. So a lot of this stuff is topical. I have a very long, detailed list of his publications. He's published many books. He's an expert on dissociation. So if anybody has any questions about that topic, please have them at the ready. But his first book that I have is The Osiris Complex, Case Studies in Multiple Personality Disorder, 94. He's also covered satanic ritual abuse. I've just done a number of shows on that. That was Principles in Treatment in 1995. I mentioned this book. He's also written about multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia. He's also written, I think, some books that aren't nonfiction. He's written The Trump Card, a psychiatrist analyzes reactions to Donald Trump. That's worth looking into, I would say. Military Mind Control, Story of Trauma and Recovery. That's a recent book. And then The Control of Eve. But you can check out a full list of his books at his website. I will put a link to his website. It's the Rossinst, ROSSINST.com. So I'll bring that up and put that in the show notes so people can link through to that. But there's a lot to talk about, a lot of things, a lot of research that he's done. Like I said, I think this book was way ahead of the curve because we were talking in the pre-show about how these topics of MK Ultra, Artichoke, Bluebird, in the history and the characters behind it. Like, people keep mentioning West. It shows up on Candace, like all these other places people are talking about it. But he can talk more about that. So, Dr. Ross, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks very much for having me. And thanks for the very kind introduction.
Great. Go ahead. I was just going to say, for people who haven't heard your name or your work, maybe you can expand on your background and what led up to the publication of the CIA Doctors.
Okay, so I was born in the old country before I emigrated to the United States, namely Canada. Born there, grew up there, medical school, psychiatry training, worked as an academic psychiatrist in Canada for 6 years. And then I moved to Texas in 1991, where I've been since. I've practiced at several different hospitals, outpatient clinics, and so on. And the way I got into, multiple personality was called multiple personality up until 1994 in the 4th edition of the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And the name was changed to Dissociative Identity Disorder. So it went from MPD to DID. I got involved in, and it's been called DID ever since. It's just a name change. The idea behind it was to try and get away from the idea that there's literally separate personalities or people who are like concretely, literally not all the same person, and shift it over towards its fragmented parts of one person. Otherwise, it's basically exactly the same thing. So I got into it in 1979 as a medical student, doing my rotation in psychiatry, and a person got admitted, had a 7-day amnesia block, and then a month before that, a 1-month amnesia block. And so that was interesting, unusual, nothing wrong with her brain. And I was already reading about and kind of practicing hypnosis. So part of her story was there was missing money from her boyfriend's bank account. So I hypnotized her, and she easily, like really, really good hypnotic subject, easily told me the names of the banks, the locations where she'd moved money from her boyfriend's account to her account. And then a couple of sessions further on, she had gone from Western Canada, where I was, to Eastern Canada, where her kids were, to visit them and buy a bunch of presents for them. So, and that was all independently confirmed. So then a few more sessions on, and I usually would go into your feet are getting warm, your legs, your eyelids are getting heavier. And how are you feeling today? And one day she goes, I'm good, Dr. Ross. Nice to meet you. And I'm talking to an 11-year-old kid all of a sudden. And so that's how I stumbled into the world of multiple personality. And then I pursued it ever since. Fast forward now to late 91, early 92, when I arrived in November 91 in Texas. So I'm at the hospital, specialty program for dissociative disorders. And a woman, like really scared, agitated, very dramatic, comes up to me and says, here, take these papers. I don't want them anymore. I go, okay. And it turns out it was MK Ultra documents that had all been declassified in the 75, 77 timeframe. So that's how I stumbled into the world of CIA military mind control. And then I read a few existing books, went down to CIA reading room because I was in Arlington for a conference, and I corresponded with them and went to this location and reviewed all the MK Ultra documents, and then ended up ordering them all, about 15,000 pages of documents. And then from the documents, I got the names of different people. Then I'd go to the medical school library. So this is pre-internet. So you literally got to take the 1972 book for this journal off the shelf, go to that issue, look up the paper, photocopy it in the photocopy machine, and then look at the references. And then that paper, there'd be a reference to this paper by this guy. So it's a whole just kind of fairly laborious piecing all this information together for a whole network of military contractors. So the book is all documented. I made a conscious decision because people would tell me all kinds of, quotes, conspiracy theory stuff, which all could very well be true, but I couldn't document it. So I made a conscious choice here. I'm only going to put documented facts in here so that it can't be attacked and discredited because there's one thing that's outrageous. But I have heard all kinds of like surrounding stories about all kinds of things. So that's in brief the story of how I got into this. And the history of it probably goes back to like 2000 BC in China, because obviously governments have been trying to sneak into opposing territory and probably have been running Manchurian candidates before they were called Manchurian candidates for a long time. But in terms of documented history, it starts in the Second World War. So in the Second World War, in 1941, the US created the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, to sort of coordinate and integrate all US and Allied intelligence efforts. The head of that was Wild Bill Donovan, who his statue stands in the foyer of the CIA headquarters in Langley to this day. Then in 1945, the war is over, and the OSS is not operating anymore. The 1947, the CIA is created, and most of the original personnel were former OSS people. So that's 1947. 1950, June, the Korean War starts. In April of 1950, which is important because it's before the Korean War started, the first, as far as we know, the first CIA mind control program was signed into operation by the director of the CIA, which was Bluebird. well, there's bluebird and artichoke were kind of overlapping, intertwined with each other, 50 to 54. So the important point there is later on, it's, oh, we just did this in reaction to what the communists were doing over in that other part of the world over there where the Korean War was going on. But clearly, that's not true because it was set up before the Korean War even started. And then there's artichoke, bluebird, which then get rolled over into MK Ultra, and then MK Ultra gets rolled over into MK Search, and MK Search ends in the early 70s. And
why did they change the name from MK Ultra to MK Search? Do you know?
No, I don't really know. It's, I don't know, some sort of need to know, keeping it compartmented, I suppose, but I don't really know. I know MK Naomi was in mostly operations in Europe and Asia. So it was kind of like the foreign wing of all these programs. And in one of the books or one of the papers I read, it explains that the name MK Naomi came from the first name of the secretary of one of the lead guys.
That's it. That's it. Why did they choose MK Ultra? Some people call it like Mind Control K or something, with
which could very well be, but don't know.
Yeah. But that's like a theme in your book. You mentioned cryptonyms a lot, so you see this kind of secrecy, compartmentalization, but also how vast these programs were. They're international. They're not just.
And MK Ultra, there's a thing I learned some CIA vocabulary by reading background books. So there's a thing called a limited hangout. That's when you release a little bit of the actual facts to cover up the rest of the facts. Because, okay, here's all we have. And so MK Ultra is, as far as I can tell, not the most sinister of the whole group of operations. Hold on, somebody's just coming in, so I got to close the door here.
No problem. Well, so I guess that should elicit the question: what is the more sinister? Like the search for Manchurian Candidate, which you say exists, the Manchurian Candidate exists. Like that's pretty sinister in and of itself, because you go into details about the process of that in your book, right?
Right. So of the public ones, there's MK Naomi, Project Often. There's a whole set of them, and Project Often is, to me, probably the most nefarious one. It's funny how things tie together. So there's a movie that came out in the 60s, and it's all about there's a group of soldiers over in Vietnam, and there's bullets going around, and one guy's sitting there like totally stoned, and there's a chemist who's sort of a character in the movie, and he ends up there. It's all paranoid and who's doing this and what's going on. The chemist says that he's been using and administering to troops a compound called BZ. So BZ, okay, well, Hollywood's just written a script here. But I found out by documents that I obtained that BZ is an actual compound that was tested by the CIA, along with there's a list of roughly 120 different compounds that the CIA and the military tested. LSD alone, they admit to at least 1,500 people were given LSD in military experiments. Sometimes the number creeps up to more 4,000. But if there's 120-ish compounds, and that's just what they've admitted to, and there's several thousand per compound, that's a lot of people got tested with drugs. So BZ is kind of a super LSD, where you go on a trip for 2 days. You don't come down for 2 or 3 days. And in Project Often, it talks about BZ, and a couple of people in Project Often died. So,
and it's supposed to make you like super aggressive. Weren't they trying to like make people really aggressive, if I remember?
Wasn't it? Well, they're trying to make people all kinds of things, but obviously you want aggressive. You don't want soldiers going, what are we having for tea today?
Right.
So on the list of chemicals included, there's an MK Ultra project done at Ionia State Hospital in Michigan, where there's, I think it was 5 psychiatrists involved. all of whom were previously military psychiatrists who served in the Vietnam War. And it was kind of interesting and kind of horrible. So the people, the subjects, were all incarcerated sex offenders who'd been found guilty and had confessed a set of sex crimes. And they gave them all different kinds of combinations of chemicals, including marijuana, barbiturate stimulants, and so on, to see if they would confess to some crime that they've never been charged with. So that's sort of a trial to see, are these things useful in interrogation? Can you drag stuff out of people? And all kinds of activating psychosis calling, stimulants. It's just like everything they could throw at the board sort of approach. But obviously, like I said, common sense is going to tell you that they're not trying to make calm, non-aggressive soldiers, right?
Right. But interrogation, you mentioned that word. That was a big issue back in the 50s after some of the pilots came back from North Korea, is my understanding. They really wanted to see if they could really elicit information from spies or foreign agents or things like that.
Exactly. And it describes that in detail in the documents. So this is the counterintelligence part of it. We have to know what we're doing here. We have to have some sort of technical expertise. So in order to have technical expertise, we have to study, use, practice the techniques ourselves so that we can use them offensively, which we downplay and don't talk about. And so we can use them defensively because foreign entities are running Manchurian candidates against us, which kind of makes sense. Like, we want to know what so-and-so and so-and-so are doing, right? And if we weren't trying to interrogate somebody, we want to be able to just dig into their unconsciousness and get around the hypnotically implanted barriers and so on. So it's kind of, in a way, it's not surprising, not unethical. It's just trying to protect democracy against the evil world, right?
Right. That's a good excuse. They've been using that excuse for a long time. Like,
well, I think
the bad guys are out there.
I always think that the best cover story is a story that's true. Just outright lie, sometime or other, somebody's going to prove that you're lying and the whole thing collapses. But if it's true that we were using it for defensive purposes, and we go, well, that's all we were doing, and it turns out it's documented that you were doing this stuff, that's kind of a good cover strategy to me. So at any rate, the documents show all this drug experimentation, trying to get through to memories. And then there's a guy named G.H. Estabrooks, who was a professor. He's actually born in Canada. So he moved to Colgate College in upstate New York, and he wrote a book in 1943, I think it was, called Hypnotism. And in there he writes about the super spy, which is a Manchurian candidate. And that goes, his writing goes up until 1971, I think it was, in a magazine called Science Digest. He again describes creating these Manchurian candidate super spies using hypnosis. And he describes it in quite a bit of detail, but he doesn't describe the method exactly in any detail. He just says they were susceptible subjects, usually military recruits. But what he does describe in detail is hypnotizing them, implanting a code word, which in this example is "the moon is clear." So you have the recruit come in, you say, here, you're assigned to take these documents to Tokyo and deliver them to Colonel so-and-so. And then he would say, the moon is clear. The artificially created identity would come out. He'd give that identity to classified information. Back inside goes the artificial identity. Over to Tokyo, the colonel at the far end goes, the moon says, thank you for the papers. The moon is clear. Out comes the classified information. The guy on the far end inserts a response back to the United States. That's how for courier purposes. And then there's any kind of operation you could think of. So,
right. So they had a hypnotic courier, and there actually are people who they found are hypnotic couriers. One guy's name was Nagel, who was actually strangely involved in the JFK assassination.
Strange, but not strange to me.
Well, there's a lot of mind control around JFK, believe it or not. Candy Jones, I think, too, was a hypnotic courier. Isn't that right? Or the person who was named.
Yeah. I read her book. It's a very interesting story. So she was a pinup.
A very attractive woman.
Oh, yeah, gorgeous. She was set out to entertain troops in the Pacific during the Second World War. She came back, and a guy who happened to live in the same building started talking with her and ended up taking over, hypnotizing her, using her for courier assignments that she didn't remember. And quite a bit of her story is documented. So why are these guys called Manchurian candidates? So in the Bluebird Artichoke documents, I have a copy of a memo from one CIA officer to another CIA officer expressing concern that there's accounts, stories that a group of GI, this is during 50 to 53, somewhere in there, were passing through a zone in Manchuria, were captured by the communist Chinese, subjected to hypnosis, and have amnesia for their conditioning. So that's the Manchurian Candidate before the book and the movie came out. So, I mean, it's not just like random gossip, right?
Right. So this amnesia is part of it. Like you said at the intro, this girl who was involved with the bank account, she had amnesia. She was a good hypnotic subject too. So not everybody is on that scale, right?
Ballparkish, about 10% of people are highly hypnotizable. So they can block out pain. You can implant hypnotic suggestions. So stage hypnotists will go, oh, when you come out of your trance state, a little bit down the road, I'm going to go, have a nice day today. And when I say have a nice day today, you're all of a sudden going to run off the stage and run around the theater and come back, which the person then does. And then the stage hypnotist asks them why they did that. And they just go, I don't know, I just felt like it. So amnesia for the post-hypnotic suggestion is very, very heavily documented in the hypnosis literature. And obviously that's part of what's going on here. So that's the origin of the name, the Manchurian Candidate. This guy, G.H. Estabrooks, he describes creating Manchurian candidates. And in between 43 and 71, I have back and forth, a lot of correspondence between him and J. Edgar Hoover. I've got him speaking about the super spy at conferences on military bases, inviting military psychiatrists to Colgate to attend conferences, and a lot of back and forth and face-to-face with the second in command of the FBI. So, and then I've got him connected to all kinds of other people, including MK Ultra top secret cleared contractors like Louis Jolyon West, whose MK Ultra project was about studying and creating dissociative states. So there's endless connections and endless facts and details in this network.
They had these big conferences at Lake Oswego in North New York, like a hypnotism conference.
Right.
And Ericksonian hypnotist, like a bigwig, was there too, friends with Estabrooks. So these guys are really, like, you show this in your book, but these guys are networked, financed, and also talking to a lot of people in the American government, not just the CIA, it's the FBI and military intelligence, right? Naval intelligence, things like that.
Right. All totally documented, high-ranking people. So in the list of them, there's 149 MK Ultra subprojects. About a third of them, roughly, were sort of not that sinister academic research grant projects. So some guy would study this or that and publish papers about it. And that investigator would be unwitting, which means he doesn't know it's CIA money because it's funneled through a front organization. And there's several of those organizations, the names are known and so on, definitely documented. Then about a third of the contracts, ballparkish, were procuring different chemicals, including going to Mexico and going into the interior and finding magic mushrooms. And then about a third were directly mind control operation, where the investigators were cleared at top secret. And they describe, going back to Bluebird Artichoke and through MK Ultra, they describe using hypnosis on subjects, send them to do retrieve documents, infiltrate, and so on, coming back, having amnesia for it. So all this is, you don't have to read between the lines. It's right there, explicitly described.
It's just hard for people to believe, I think, is really it. That these guys use, I think you mentioned in your book, a lot of these doctors had top secret clearance as well. That's not even known. So they're functioning and externally as academics at these storied institutions, but
Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
these
almost
are
like
guys at all the leading universities in the country. So there's a psychiatrist, Robert Heath, at Tulane, and I have a copy of his paper from the Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease that I've personally published papers in. This was early 70s, and he's funded by military intelligence, documented for sure, and some kind of CIA funding, but I couldn't get into it was something other than MK Ultra. It was some other set of projects that are still classified. But
I think he was involved. Heath comes to mind as one of the guys using electrodes. Is that right?
Exactly. So in this paper, which published in the mainstream like journals, he describes from the first edition of the diagnostic manual that American Psychiatric Association lists all the disorders and how you diagnose them. First edition was 52. Second edition was 72. Third edition, which is now DSM-3, is 1980. So up until early 70s, officially in the manual, homosexuality was a mental disorder. So if you were gay, you were mentally ill because you were gay. And what happened, of course, is then a gay lobby started gaining political power within American psychiatry, started lobbying to get that out of the DSM system. So in the 1980 edition, homosexuality is no longer in there, but there's a disorder called ego-dystonic homosexuality, which means dystonic means it doesn't fit with your ego or your self-conception. So you're not gay because you're not mentally ill because you're gay. The mental illness is you have conflict about it, you're unhappy about it, you're depressed about it. And then 94, the fourth edition, ego-dystonic homosexuality is out, and there's not a word about it at all. But this guy, Robert Heath's experiment, he was mentally ill because he was gay. And so what Heath did, all in detail in the paper, put electrodes in the guy's brain, and there's multiple little wires going to different parts of the brain, and he would then hook the guy up and send electrical charge, because the electrode was sticking out of his skull, and the wires are going to the electrodes, send a signal to activate the pleasure centers in his brain to sort of build him up to a pre-orgasmic state. And while he's in that pre-orgasmic state, which could go on and on and on and on and on, he was watching heterosexual pornography to condition him to be straight. And that after some months of this conditioning, the other little funny, if you have the right sense of humor, horrible and sinister if you don't, he had a little box, like a little transmitter type box on his belt, connected up to the wires with a button so he could stimulate himself. Wow. But they had to take it away because he was pushing it literally like hundreds of times per hour.
That's amazing. So Heath was doing that too, because I've heard of Jose Delgado.
Well, I can talk about him in a second. So this guy, they cured him of homosexuality. At the end, what they did is to make sure, they brought in a prostitute. He had sex with the prostitute while they're monitoring his brainwaves. And then they debriefed him and the prostitute said, yeah, he functioned fine, normal heterosexual guy. And then it says he was cured of homosexuality with only one relapse in the first 6 months. So ridiculous. Jose Delgado, so there's a network of these brain electrode guys that Jolly West is connected into as well.
I didn't know that.
So this guy's at Yale, Jose Delgado, neurosurgeon. Yeah, this is a video of this bull's got an electrode implanted in its brain. And what Jose Delgado does is he pushes the button on the transmitter box, and the bull just settles down and becomes calm and is not a threat. He also put these electrodes into all kinds of people's brains, including underage girls, to treat their epilepsy or whatever their mental health problem was. And he developed like with Heath, there had to be physical wires going to the electrode, but Delgado could seal it over under the scalp and use a remote transmitter box. So
a lot of this stuff that was not disclosed, right? It's in secret documents. Like I think Delgado said the experiments were done, but I'd never heard that they were like confirmed. So
absolutely, yeah. I've got the papers where, like, there's one paper, all mainstream journals. Obviously, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? The most sinister stuff's all still hidden, but there's pictures of a young girl who they thought had epilepsy, which was very iffy. And in one photograph, she's looks kind of normal. Another photograph, she's staring off into space with a blank expression. Another one, she's furiously pounding on the wall, all depending on which electrode was being stimulated. So
they really could adjust people's behavior through the stimulation, whether it's sexual or personality too, right?
They had very bogus rationales for why they were doing this, and they're just trying to help people, etc.
Right.
So
and that's like your theme of Hippocratic Oath. Like, what's the point?
Slight violation of Hippocratic Oath on multiple reasons, because you're inducing mental, physical, brain disorder, which doctors are supposed to be fixing, things like that. There's no informed consent. There's no ethical review by the university. There's no lawyer. Family's not informed. And then you're just, see you. No follow-up to see what happened to you. So this video keeps going on, but
I'm sorry, I can turn it off. Is it boring? Sorry.
Well, no, it's fine. But if people noticed, the bull's kind of furiously charging, and then it just turns away and is kind of aimlessly doing nothing based on pushing the button.
Right. That's wild. So these are done pretty early too, 50s and 60s too, right? So it's not...
The first brain electrode contract in MK Ultra was in the 50s.
See, it's so long ago. It's just...
Well, then imagine how miniaturized, how fine-tuned, how driven from satellites it's gotten since then.
It's terrifying, really. Like some of the new patents like that have been put out in the last 5 or 10 years are really sinister, like nanotech and 6G type stuff, like really
yes, sir.
Unnerving is the way to put it.
So I was going to say I lost my train of thought, but that's the way this is. It's just wandering around this network of all these interconnected experiments and controls and so on.
But you also put it in the context of other unethical things. So this mind control, Tuskegee, paperclip doctors.
Right.
Yeah.
So at the end, this is all fully documented as well. And there's a book called Project Paperclip. So late in the war, where we knew we were winning the war at this point, and we know obviously the Nazis had all kinds of scientists with all kinds of skills in all kinds of subject areas. And at the end of the war, late in the war, and then after the war, the French, British, Americans, and Russians were all scrambling to try and recruit these guys and bring them home. And problem was the whole series of problems. The problem was a lot of them were Nazi war criminals, so they couldn't get visas to come in the United States. So, because the State Department would just block it. So the military/CIA set up a series of programs to bring these guys in secretly, routing them around the usual State Department visa requirements. One of those guys was named Albertus Strughold. He was a German scientist whose, again, all documented research included putting, guess who, gypsies, Jews, prisoners of war, into a chamber and then dropping the pressure in the chamber immediately to the equivalent of 50,000 feet to see what would happen. Well, they had brain bleeds, they died, all kinds of horrible things. And he also had people drink seawater, huge amounts of seawater, so they'd get an electrolyte imbalance and they would die, to study what could we do for drowned pilots when they didn't have anything to drink except seawater. All kinds of experiments like this. So he would have been tried at Nuremberg, would have been found guilty, would have been executed. Instead, he's routed through, there's a series of these programs, Project Paperclip and several other programs. He was brought over to the United States to one of the bases in San Antonio, and there's a library named after him on the base in San Antonio, a full-on Nazi war criminal, all documented. And there's another guy that some people may have heard of, named Werner von Braun, right? Huge rocket science guy. He was the head of the Nazi V2 rocket program, which was the rockets that came over to England. And there's basically a Nazi Jewish prisoner camp. And those Jewish prisoners became the forced labor for the rocket program in Germany, and hundreds of them worked to death. So again, he's a full-on Nazi.
I think he was a colonel, like he had all the Nazi regalia before they paperclipped him or something like that.
Right. And so this not just a few like obscure guys, and they were brought over and installed in NASA, universities, and so on.
There was one guy involved in the creation of Lyme disease. There's arguments that he was on this island, kind of, I think, fairly close to Long Island, that area of the U.S., doing experimentation on how to weaponize insects.
Right.
I think that bled out, and that's why Lyme is the region that's just north of this place where he was doing experiments. Bloom, I think, was his name, Blume. Well, you got a nice comment here, Colin, from Rise to Liberty. He says, his book is truly an amazing piece of work and mandatory for anyone who researches this topic. So thanks for the nice comment.
Thank you very much.
Can you read that? Yeah,
I can read it.
Okay, because I'm trying to put up all the comments. You got over 100 live listeners. Thanks, everybody, for this being here. If you have any questions for the guests, too, please put them in the comments, guys. Where were we? Nazi paperclip. There's a lot of them. There are hundreds of them, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah, lots and lots and lots in all areas of expertise. Well, there's all kinds of interesting, good comments here.
Christina Dalling says Fort Sam and Lackland both experimented with MKUltra. I think the experiments took place almost everywhere in universities and at bases. Like it's almost like they're all involved.
Well, the American Psychological Association was a top secret cleared contractor under MKUltra. So the organization itself, not just the individual person at whichever university, is a very systemic, very widespread. It's not just a couple of crazy people in a basement somewhere.
And you mentioned Cameron. I think he was at one point the head of the World Psychiatric Association or something, like some huge.
Yeah, Ewan Cameron is. I think there's a limited hangout about him to some degree, but he was an MKUltra top secret cleared contractor, head of the Department of Psychiatry at McGill, head of the Quebec Canadian Psychiatric Association's Society for Biological Psychiatry, and very active with William Sargent, who is one of the founders of the World Psychiatric Association. And he was part of the team, the psychiatric team, that went over and interviewed Nazi scientists at Nuremberg. And so those guys were using mescaline. It was before LSD was available, and to experiment on prisoners. And then Ewan Cameron came back, and lo and behold, he did LSD experiments at McGill, funded by the CIA.
Close friend of Dulles. Like they had a personal relationship. He actually debriefed Hess. So number 3 in the whole Nazi, regime was analyzed psychologically by Ewan Cameron, which is really crazy. Plum Island, thanks, Rise of Liberty. There's a whole books about Plum Island. I've done shows on that, where they supposedly weaponized ticks and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's all fully documented too. There's Cameron describes having lunch with Dulles in Washington.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of Freemasons. I think Dr. Ross mentioned Esther Brooks. Esther Brooks was a 32nd degree Freemason, and so was Hoover. I think Hoover was high up in Masonry as well.
Right. Yeah, there's a whole. So my view of this is, it's like the Boy Scouts, right? There's all kinds of organized pedophile sexual abuse going on within the Boy Scouts, but not everybody in the Boy Scouts is a pedophile. And it's sort of like a subcategory within the Boy Scouts. I think that's probably true of Masonry, that the top guys and a subset of guys are overlapping with, in terms of funding and participation, with CIA military mind control. But I imagine like your average Mason knows nothing about it. I assume that's the case.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Cameron's one of them. You mentioned, was interesting in your book, you mentioned Johns Hopkins as a university itself, separate from like the individual CIA psychiatrist. What is it specifically about Johns Hopkins that sets itself apart?
Well, number one, it's a big time medical school, right? So that's not, again, the Southern Idaho alternative school of fringe medicine. I mean, that's mainstream big. So no insult to Idaho. Having grown up in Canada, it's even further north than Idaho. So there's contractors in this network at Johns Hopkins. And now we're going to sort of segue over to multiple personality dissociative identity disorder. So so I'm a specialist in multiple personality, and there 92, the organization called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was formed, which closed up shop 2019, I think it was. But they were organized, funded, they had a board with lots of luminaries on it, including Louis Jolyon West and Martin Orne, who was also top secret cleared under MK Ultra. And they were out explicitly, clearly, we're going to discredit multiple personality. It's either very rare or non-existent. And they were like organized, hostile, lawsuits. I got slandered and insulted by multiple people. So it was kind of an intense time. There were people losing their licenses for creating false memories and creating multiple personality out of nowhere. And there were some out of control, like highly needed to have their license taken away type therapists around. So as far as I can figure out, the board members and the sort of powers that be in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation had multiple different agendas. Some were like hostile to Freud, so they thought this is a bunch of Freudian nonsense. Some were memory researchers like Elizabeth Loftus, who I've met personally and tried to make friends with. No success at all. Completely locked in rigid ideas about multiple personalities bogus. It's all false memories. It's all been implanted by therapists.
She gets paid a lot as an expert to have those ideas, FYI.
Oh, yeah,
to the public.
Seriously.
Like I think her billing rate for court cases is off the charts, man.
Right. And
$1,000 an hour.
She's been in a lot of high profile cases. And it's just like I could put on a wig and say, "Hi, I'm Elizabeth Loftus. Here's what I have to say. It's all false memories. It's suggestion. It's hypnotic techniques. It's lousy therapy. None of it ever happened." I mean, that's just her analysis every single time, which sometimes is true.
She presents it very cogently in a kind of academic,
very
delivery, though. I think so.
Yeah. She's a bright person who's done lots and lots and lots of very useful, good research on like eyewitness testimony and doing experiments showing that it's very easy to, first of all, there's a lot of disagreement between different eyewitnesses about what happened, a lot of inaccuracy for small details, but also big details, and how you can implant suggestions about there was such an, the people watch a video, the car goes down the street around the corner and drives along a country road, and then half the people are just asked to explain what's in the video. Other half are asked a specific leading question. What color was the roof on the red barn that the person drove by? So there was no red barn. And the person goes, oh yeah, it was a black roof, which is tiny little details, but it shows that suggestion is a real thing that can alter somebody's memory and report. So that's all good research, because people sometimes are wrongfully, found guilty and sent to jail when there's just erroneous eyewitness mistaken testimony. So that's good and useful. But then she got on this with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, got on the hobby horse of it's all false memories, it's all implanted suggestions. And exactly what her motivation for that is, I'm not entirely sure.
But it discounts a lot of like sexual abuse, childhood sexual abuse.
Oh, yeah, totally.
SRA stuff. So it really sweeps a lot of maybe possible or potential crimes, or maybe even crimes that are validated.
Absolutely.
Out of criminal kind of
it's the leading
culpability,
because it's the victims are mostly women, right? So they're a bunch of hysterical, suggestible women. So it's not exactly like a feminist, pro-women kind of platform. It's very chauvinistic, very put down, and it's also stereotypical because most of the defendants are males, some are females. So it's like the evil Svengali manipulator therapist unwittingly has implanted suggestions in the poor, hysterical, suggestible woman who doesn't even know her own mind. So there's a whole, not exactly feminist angle to that. And then she comes on as I'm the scientist, but there's no published work anywhere in the mental health literature verifying the percentage of memories that are false, partially or fully false. There's no data, no scientific evidence. It's all just opinion. So it's the posture of being a scientist, but you're just pounding on a political platform.
Right. It's like scientism or something different than actual objective, like cold, rational science. It happens a lot in courts of law and these things. There's so many people camouflaging their opinion through science, science overlay or something.
Right.
Her, for people who don't know, she was in the Epstein files that were released last Friday, and she has like one entry in there, and her resume is like 50 pages long, man. It's incredible. She really
mine's longer.
Yeah, I think you're right. But it's really something else. Colin, do you have time to take a few questions? I've got a lot of comments here.
Sure.
Let's go through.
And I'd be happy to come back another time.
Oh, great. I'd love to have you back. Yeah. I mean, we can talk about, you have a lot of other things to talk about, SRA, things like that.
Yeah, I wrote a book published in University of Toronto Press, 1995, called Satanic Ritual Abuse, Principles of Treatment. And it wasn't about, is it real, not real, can I prove it, not prove it. It was about, okay, no literature to read, no training, nobody ever talks about it. Now what do you do? So it's to help and support therapists, not to get into the political war of how much is real and how much is hysteria.
There's a lot of therapists and stuff like that whose specialty is SRA and things. And there's other books, like I think Tim Tate wrote a book on it, got real trouble. Like they really went after him. That's another political thing too. Like, you're a satanic panicker and stuff like that.
I have the honor of being the only psychiatrist who's written a book about satanic ritual abuse.
Wow, that's cool.
But I never, surprisingly, I've never gotten like the Nazis show up at the door and take me away and interrogate me, or I had a couple of lawsuits, but that was nothing for back in the 90s when there was a bazillion lawsuits going on.
Right. There was a whole like blizzard of lawsuits. I remember there was one woman out in San Diego. Her specialty was SRA. I think
Right.
Keith Hansen interviewed her. I can't remember her name. Beam Me Up, Mr. Scott asks, are you familiar with the Neuro Soup Girl who was involved with Picard? I know he was an LSD manufacturer. And Todd cooking up LSD in the 90s in an underground bunker. Have you ever heard that? I mean, you cover LSD and Hoffman in your book.
Right.
But I think it's interesting the way LSD kind of came out of Switzerland to Intel and military, and then into
there's a again Bluebird Artichoke, I'm pretty sure, a memo saying that this is an interesting side history. The one CIA officer saying to the other, at least they're concerned that the Soviet, they always called them the Soviet, are going to buy up the entire world's supply of LSD from Sandoz Pharmaceutical in Switzerland, where it was first synthesized by accident. So in 53, 54, there was 2 contracts. One was relatively small. One was hundreds of thousands of dollars, top secret clearance for Eli Lilly Company to develop a secure U.S. supply of LSD. So the first manufacturers and distributors of LSD in the United States is actually Eli Lilly Company. And LSD works on serotonin. So they had to develop a lot of expertise on serotonin brain physiology. Lo and behold, a few decades later, out comes the first SSRI antidepressant, which works on serotonin equals Prozac. So somebody could investigate a whole back history there.
Wow. That's amazing. Talking about drugging a population, serotonin reuptake inhibitor, right? It's an inhibition,
right?
Supposedly. I don't know Neurosoup guys. Somebody can write that in the comments. I don't know. I actually interviewed Jim McDougall, who wrote a book about Picard, and so I reached out to Picard, who wrote his own book. His lawyer sent me a cease and desist letter, told me to go pound sand. So I just I got the message. I'm not going to ask you for an interview ever again, Mr. Picard. So that was a big, it's kind of, it felt like a shot across the bow, but interesting story in itself. Christina, did you find any reference to Pilgrim State Hospital in Kings Park, New York? Are you familiar with that at all, Colin?
No.
Okay. Richard Gardiner, does that name ring a bell?
Yeah, he's he focuses mostly on PTSD, not so much on multiple personality disorder, but it's all bogus. It's not real. It's not a legitimate disorder. They're just trying to get money out of the military for disability, all that kind of stuff. He acts and talks like the sensible academic.
Don't you think that there's some, maybe it's not termed post-traumatic stress disorder, but some type of trauma, lingering trauma due to after traumatizing events? Maybe it doesn't have that terminology, but don't you think there's some kind of unfortunate memories of people have been in war or abused heavily or something like that?
Well, that's true all across the board, right? So you have you're heavily depressed for a while, and with or without treatment, it eases off, and there's sort of a grumbling lower level of depression, and something else happens, it comes back up. Also true of PTSD.
Have you heard of University of Minnesota as a center of MK Ultra? Have you heard anything about that?
Yes, I have. So that's LSD experiments. Again, a published paper showing. So this Amadeus Marazzi was the guy who worked at the Fort Detrick Chemical Warfare Division for a while. But while he's a professor at the University of Minnesota, this is based on this published paper now, where he's doing LSD experiments, and it says at the bottom, funded by the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. So we know it's military contracting. And you don't get to be a lead guy at Fort Detrick without a clearance level, right? So he would bring people in, give them LSD, and then see what's going on with them. And there's a picture of a guy in the Ames Leaf Room, which was originally developed by a guy, Dr. Ames, on contract with the Office of Naval Research. And there's a guy sitting in the Ames Leaf Room on campus at the University of Minnesota, which is basically a bunch of 2x4s and plywood. And there's leaves glued to all the walls, the floor, ceiling, and the far wall. and there's a guy sitting just inside the Ames leaf room wearing these specialized goggles which distort all the perspectives. And he's on a significant dose of LSD. And he's controlling a bar at the far end of the leaf room to make it horizontal, except it's actually like at an angle like this. And that's, so this is kind of the sinister aspect of the incredibly stupid research. Because what was
those pictures are at the back of this book too, right?
Yeah, they're in the back of the book. Yeah.
That's right.
So what was the conclusion from the research? If you're high on LSD, wearing goggles that distort all the angles, you can't see straight. That's literally like what they discovered from the research. But also in the book, there's a chapter about a woman who walks into the ER close to the university and says, she's like all jumbled up, and she says that she was given a dose of LSD by her boss and put in a room on campus that entirely lined with leaves. And it's all psychotic, crazy, hallucinating. But she was a subject in one of these experiments for documented fact, for real. So sometimes the most crazy sounding, impossible, absurd stories are actually totally objectively real.
I had a guest who was part of the MK Ultra experiments at Georgetown through the Geschickter Fund, or some really long name.
Yeah.
She, like, nobody believed her, but then she was telling the story and mentioned doctors' names and being induced and stuff. And I was like, sounds like you were one of them back in the day. Maybe she wasn't like super abused. I hope not. But
well, the Geschickter Foundation is in the documents. It's these front organizations are called cutouts, and there's 2 or 3 of them identified, and it's one. And that was experiments on cancer patients inside the hospital.
Like, they set up at Georgetown a new wing for all their experiments, so you would never know what that from externally that it was for testing and stuff like that. So that's talk about sinister.
There's a little twist on that story. Because there was money from a foundation, that triggered matching funding from the federal government.
So they're clever about it. They're clever about funding their experiments too, right? I mean, amazing stuff. Like the real history is just.
There's a guy named Carl Rogers who's written books on humanistic psychology, psychiatry, client-centered therapy. See, Mr. Nice Guy. I can't remember the sub-project number, but he's cleared it top secret on an MK Ultra sub-project to test LSD on people with diagnosed schizophrenia. And I have his paper describing that.
So it makes them even more kind of unbalanced, maybe? Is that like it takes somebody.
Sometimes you can't figure out, like, what are these guys actually trying to establish? Just like the Marazzi. Hey, we have to do research at a university to find out you have weird goggles on and you're high on LSD. You don't see straight.
That's wild. And I think, like you mentioned in your book, like 4 of those sub projects were focused on children too. Like that's what's really crazy is like.
Well, that's crazy, but not so crazy. So there are 4 sub projects on children, and this guy G.H. Esterbrook's, he did some sort of research at 2 orphanages. So we know a Manchurian candidate doctor was getting into orphanages, not to help children, obviously. So some of these projects are quite bland. So the ones on children included one at international. I think the name was International Summer Children's Village or something like that. And it's a bunch of kids from a whole bunch of different countries are brought into a summer camp. And the contractor is a regular academic guy who's unwitting. The money came through a front organization studying how children communicate with each other when they don't have a common language. So it's just like sort of academic sociological research. But in the documents, it says the purpose of the project is to form a relationship with young foreign nationals who may be of future interest to the agency.
So they're doing it early. Wow.
Sometimes the research itself is just sort of not the real point of the project.
Wow, that's amazing. Rise to Liberty asks, question, why do you believe there is such a hostility towards MPD or DID?
Well, first of all, there is a lot of hostility. Like there's no other, it's in the diagnostic manual, has been since was mentioned in the original 1952, but it's had its own section, dissociative disorders, since 1980. So it's officially recognized. But of all the disorders in the DSM, by far, MPD DID gets the most berating, punching in the face. It's all bogus. It's all real. It's stupid. And many people have told me their psychiatrists said DID is bullshit. So there's no doubt that there's a very high level of hostility with a veneer of, we're sensible scientists here. We don't believe in this nonsense. So I don't know for a fact, but I think it's multiple factors. One is it's very threatening to the ideological framework of psychiatry if severe, complicated mental disorders like DID can be caused by trauma and are not brain disorders. And there's lots of publications, including by me, that people with MPD DID have been in the mental health system for many years before diagnosis usually, and many of them have received diagnosis of schizophrenia, received antipsychotic medications. In one study I did, 12% had gotten electroshock therapy. So these people are perceived as having severe, legit mental disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar, etc. And if it's actually true that all these psychiatrists can't tell the difference between schizophrenia and trauma-driven DID, which is treatable with psychotherapy, their expertise doesn't look too good, right? So it's protecting the paradigm, it's protecting the ego and the reputations, it's covering over the fact that psychiatry as a whole is not doing a good job diagnostically, let alone treatment. Then there's the role of trauma in general. As soon as you tune into MPD DID, you realize that trauma is like a big driver of all of this. And that's true throughout the mental health field. So it's downplaying the trauma. It's people, psychiatrists, mental health people, psychologists. Academic psychologists might be the most hostile group, actually. So they don't want to be thinking about feeling, digging into their own unresolved trauma. They don't want to be admitted that they themselves have been perpetrators against family members, undergraduate students, etc. And so there's just the personal part of it. And then False Memory Syndrome Foundation, hello, 2 of the board members were top secret Manchurian Candidate program contractors. So they want to keep a lid on all that, because part of what happened late 80s, early 90s is not just satanic ritual abuse, but people were coming into treatment describing being taken to military bases, put in special programs, had all kinds of experiments done to them. So we got to discredit that, get the lid on that pretty fast. So what percentage of the total motivation goes to which one of those factors? I don't know. So I think it's like multifactorial.
Wow, great answer. Those 2 that were on False Memory Syndrome Foundation was West and Orrin, is that right?
Yeah. Okay. And their MK Ultra projects had to do with dissociation hypnosis.
Great question, Rise to Liberty. Thank you. Flip says implanted false memories are totally real. Just see the Mandela effect. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Not totally sure I understand that comment. But
Trudy Chase. Do you know who Trudy Chase is?
Yeah, she wrote an autobiography sometime late 80s, early 90s. She tells it, I don't know, I never met her personally. Her story is not particularly different from hundreds of other stories I've heard in treatment. One interesting thing, though, is as an adult, she decides to go back and confront her father because she's mad at him and she's going to like verbally attack him and so on. And she hasn't seen him for years. She opens the door and there's this pathetic, feeble old man. And it just went, oh my God, that's him. So she didn't mercilessly attack him.
Oh, interesting. It's David VV asks, what is the earliest occurrence of hypnotism? That's a great question. I think it kind of goes all the way back in time, but maybe Colin knows more than I do.
Well, I would say that tigers and lions have been practicing hypnosis on game animals for millions of years.
Don't snakes do the same thing to their prey, or a cobra? So you kind of hypnotize the prey?
Yeah, there's in trauma literature, it's fight, flight, and freeze. So if there's a predator coming at you, or if you're going counter back at the predator, if it's a grizzly bear you're dealing with, you're probably going to get fight. If it's a deer, you're going to get flight. If it's an opossum, you're going to get freeze and curl up. And human beings can do, all of the above. Some people are more this way, some people are more that way. So without a formal hypnotic induction, like snakes haven't taken courses on hypnosis, right? But it's tapping into the same freeze kind of physiology. And there's videos, lots of, besides funny cat and dog videos online, there's nice videos of a gazelle or whatever it is like in the lion's mouth, literally, and looks dead, completely shut down. And then a bunch of hyenas come running by, and the lion takes off, or I think it was a lion, might have been a tiger. And then you see the dead seeming gazelle or whatever it is lying there. And then all of a sudden the chest walls start to move just a little bit. And over a couple of minutes, eyelids start to flutter, opens his eyes. And then within a few minutes, it stands up and runs away. So that's the freeze response, which has been in evolution forever. If there's no possibility of fight or flight, that's a good backup strategy.
Flip Wilson asks, you should do a show on psychotronic weapons. I really should. I think that those original brain implants are kind of psychotropic. I don't know if they're outright weapons, but they're definitely tampering with one person's brain.
Well, I get emails from people fairly regularly. They're online, they're targeted individuals.
TS.
And there's actually an organization trying to lobby various governments and agencies and so on to have inquiries and hearings and bring out the facts. But this is Havana syndrome. Havana syndrome appears to be some sort of acoustic or electromagnetic weapon that was beamed at embassies in Cuba and in Moscow as well. So these weapons exist. If you go online, you can see videos of the actual the weapon mounted on a truck. And in the capture of Maduro, it's not like a hidden conspiracy theory. Trump describes, we knock out the air defense system, we knock out the lights, we come in with the helicopters and so on, and the drones. And this unspecified weapon is beamed at all these guys, and hundreds of them just fall over or killed or
started bleeding, strange things. Yeah.
So these weapons actually exist. There's a paper in military. It's in my book, but Military Digest, I think, is the name of the journal, that describes some of the back history of this, and it describes an aircraft, military aircraft, at several hundred feet up in the air, and the electromagnetic weapon is beamed at a target on the ground, and the specs of the weapon and so on. It can induce unease, discomfort, disorientation, dizziness, feeling sick and nauseous, all the way to collapsing. These things have been used for crowd control for sure, sound and electromagnetic. And
I have a video. I can try to bring it up for you guys in a sec, but I do have one. They used it in Serbia recently, and you can hear the noise, and the crowd is in the streets, and it's like the parting of the, Red Sea or something. They just spread out like they all got hit by something at the same time. Your book has a bunch of appendices, so there's tons of appendices and footnotes, so people can get these references.
Absolutely no doubt that those weapons exist and have been used operationally. Oh, Ted Bundy, great.
Rise to Liberty says, when Loftus was testifying on behalf of Ted Bundy here in Salt Lake City, she wrote in her own book that she was hoping he would ask her to stay at his place. I think this is a lot about her. Wow,
Man.
that's
In her book, Witness for the Defense, she describes, I forget how old, I think 11, somewhere around 11, 9, 10, 11. Her babysitter, who she names, takes her up to her bedroom, lifts her skirt up, and then everything goes black. And next thing she knows, she's in the bathroom washing up.
That's pretty weird too. Wow. Flip Wilson, while the U.S. was doing MK Ultra stuff, the Soviets were working on psychotronic weapons. I believe they've come. Yeah, I think that.
In a lot of ways, the Soviets were ahead of us on a lot of the paranormal spy, remote viewing, penetrating the target's dreams, mental telepathy, clairvoyance, all that stuff. They were ahead of us for a while.
Yeah, they were way ahead in research. Pavlov and a lot of these guys. There were a lot of they're just skilled scientific people. The Russians in general. Rise to Liberty has another question. Has the University of Utah shown up in any of your work? I've been digging and found evidence they were involved in MK Ultra, but I have not found it documented. It might be newly uncovered. Do you have any thoughts on
that? Several thoughts. So I've heard about satanic ritual abuse, but I've had people describe pretty similar ritualized abuse, mind control programming in New Age cults, spin-offs of Christian churches, Mormon church. So it's not just Satanism. But I know nothing about organized MK Ultra in Utah. And a little recommendation there is MK Ultra is a specific project that ran from early 50s to early 60s. But MK Ultra also is used in the vernacular as a sort of umbrella term for all mind control programs. So there's nothing about Utah in the MK Ultra documents. So it either didn't happen or it was under some other cryptonym.
Right. 1965 Gen X Tomcat. Thank you for providing conversation. Nice, clean delivery. Thank you for the nice comment.
Yeah, thank you.
Have you ever heard the name Dr. John Hall?
Yeah, he's actually in Texas, I think. He's pro the memories are real and there is programming and there is mind control.
Do you find that in the psychiatric community, there's two camps that are opposed on those kind of topics about SRA and or kind of, this mind control topic? Like, so because it seems like some of the people in the psychiatric community are not addressing this research. Do you find that to be true?
Denial, well, just silence, and then it goes to active denial. And then it goes to active attack. So the most common thing is just, we don't talk about that here.
Right. So it's just, I don't want to talk about it. That's how they got away with it. So I'm glad that you wrote this book and bring it to light. And it is human rights violations. It's a violation of the Hippocratic Oath. It's a violation of disclosure. It's a violation of consent. A lot of these people are mixed up. I've done shows on you and Cameron. There's a recent lawsuit that are digging all this stuff back up. And I talked to this woman whose mom was in there, and they treated her like a lab rat. They were giving her treatments but sending her back home without ever disclosing what they were doing and then studying her. And I think she was under treatment by Cameron for 17 years. Cool. It's just absolutely.
There's a chapter in the CIA Doctors about Linda McDonald. I have her entire file from you and Cameron, including signatures by him. And she was brought in, a bunch of young kids, fairly stressed out, somewhat depressed. In, I think it was May to September, she got 102 or 3 electroshock treatments. And in each treatment, the button was pushed 6 times instead of 1 time. And it completely, permanently erased all her memories from being in the hospital back to birth. And when she was visited in the hospital, she didn't recognize her husband or her kids. She had to learn, she played the guitar and sang. She had to completely relearn how to cook, how to play the guitar. She had to keep a board in her kitchen with little pins of where her kids had gone to play because she couldn't remember. And then she made this amazing recovery just kind of on her own.
That's good. That's what happened to, I think it was Elizabeth Nixon's mom. I forgot her name. She was an heir to the Molson Beer family. But it seems like they were like trying to do really sinister stuff to women, like try to create, what's the movie where all the women are the same? What's that book by Ira Levin? Yeah, Stepford Wives. It's like they were doing that without. So taking out some like anti-woman hatred or something on the patients.
In 10 years, we won't need them because we'll just have a bunch of sex bots available.
Right. It's almost like the 50s Hugh Hefner thing, like turn them into, playmates.
It was quite a few years ago now, not like 20 years ago, but I remember reading Japan was a little ahead of the curve on sex bots. So there's a family where the husband's got the sex bot who sleeps in the bed with him and his wife. And the daughter, who's like just preteen, like hates the sex bot and is all incensed. But then she gets a little bit older and bigger until her clothing size is the same as the sex bot. And then she starts sharing clothes with the sex bot and thinks she's great. So the weird spin-off effects on family dynamics and social functions, who knows where that's going to lead.
Right. Yeah. It's really amazing. Thanks through the chat. Thanks for all the listeners. We had over 150 live listeners. Great comments. Rise to Liberty and everybody else. Really appreciate it. It is Friday. You've seen the lights go down in Texas as we've been doing this show. Yeah. So, Colin, is there anything you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap it up?
Just if you want to pursue, I have my website, rossinst.com, which is short for Ross Institute. All my books are on Amazon. And I have a whole other area, which is energy fields. I've got a patent and a book and a bunch of papers, and that's rossenergysystems.com.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that research. What is it about energy fields that intrigues you?
The basic idea is the human energy field, soul, spirit, and the electromagnetic field of the body are the same, just viewed through different lenses with different vocabulary. And one of the patents, and I have a paper where there's a normal EEG electrodes on my head, electromagnetically insulated goggles, and a non-contact electrode hanging in front of my eyes that's not contacting me physically, and a control electrode hanging outside the goggles. The control electrode is just 60 hertz background noise. The electrode here that's not touching my body is exactly the same tracing as the two contact electrodes on my forehead, proving that a clinically detailed measurable signal comes out of your eye, which, why would it not? Like, the electrodes are out here. It's not like the signal stops right here, right? And then, so that allows us to start studying the sense of being stared at scientifically.
Interesting.
And then
talk about Russian research. They did a lot of research where the scientists or certain parts of their scientific community believed they could scientifically detect an aura, like some kind of energy field. The language, like you said, the language and the terms are different, but
as soon as you
show on that,
the human aura is actually just the electromagnetic field of the body extending out in space. Now you can unify Eastern and Western medicine. You can study it scientifically. You can show what's real, what's not real. And right now, so when I'm making fun of organized medicine, which I like to do, I say, hey, guys, I've got a phone here that it's not plugged into the wall. See, it's a cell phone. You guys ever heard of this? To take an EKG or an EEG, still you have to have a wire plugged into something. We need to have remote. Like, get up with the 21st century here, guys. So the idea is you can scan the body with it's basically a Star Trek device. And then why are we only measuring the brain and the heart? The whole body is just generating bazillion bits of medically relevant information that we could use for diagnosis, treatment tracking, and so on. And then there's a whole bunch of other aspects to that.
Yeah, check it out, guys. I'll put a link to both websites. This one is the rossinst.com, ROSSINST.com. And thanks for all the nice comments. Rise to Liberty, Al Queen, Christina. So a lot of really positive feedback from everybody. And again, what we talked just kind of as a baseline, just to kind of discuss all these topics, is this book, which is way ahead of the curve. The first one was published in 2025, half a quarter century ago. The CIA Pardon?
The Human Energy Field is a more recent book. So.
The Human Energy Field. Right. And you did one on kind of a famous case. It was the one about this. It was a famous book. Wasn't that the story that I told you about? Now I lost my...
The Control of Eve?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I actually, she's died, but I actually met her several times and have interviewed her and so on. She was It
was Chris Sizemore, right? Three Faces of Eve.
Yeah. Very famous book and movie in the 50s.
That's right. Yeah, that's
right. She was fully integrated back into one and was very high functioning, did lots of good work. Very pleasant, charming person.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back anytime. Again, we talked about this book, CIA Doctors, Human Rights Violations by American Psychiatrists, originally published 25 years ago as Bluebird, Deliberate Creation of Multiple Personality by Psychiatrists. And the guest, again, is Colin A. Ross, ROSSMD. And I'll put links to his websites in my show notes. Thank you so much for your time, really.
And thank you, everybody, for the comments.
Yeah, for sure. Stay there. Stay there.